Good morning. Maribel, can you hear me? Give a thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and unmute our speakers. We're going to be getting started here, and I'll be giving some instructions for the webinar and how to chat and everything. So let's see here. If our speakers want to go ahead and turn on their video whenever they are ready, and unmute as well. Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alana Hitchcock. I'm the Public Affairs Director for 211 LA County, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming and hosting you here today to this important topic on tenants' rights and understanding what your rights are when you are struggling to pay the rent. We are expecting a large number of attendees, so due to the timing and the size of the audience, while we will be having a Q&A section at the end, if you are unable to wait and ask your question, you can go ahead and put it anytime into the Q&A bar that you should see on either the bottom or top of your screen. There's a Q&A section there. But we ask that you not ask any questions that have personal details in them for you, or very specific personal scenarios, as we will not have time to go over the specifics of that, and we don't want to go over someone's individual case. Also, we will be talking a little bit about resources. We know that rental assistance is a big question for people out there towards the end, but the main focus of today's conversation with our experts is on tenants' rights and knowing what you need to know if you are in a situation of struggling to pay your rent. Couple housekeeping things. You will not be able to talk. We're only going to have the panelists talking, but as I mentioned, you can put your questions into the Q&A section. We also we're recording this today, and we will be posting it online. So if for any reason you have to leave early, you can check back on 211 LA's website. We'll also be sending it out to the attendees. And then one more thing I wanted to let you know is that we will be trying the polling feature to ask a couple of questions from the audience, including if you would like to be contacted for follow-up with additional resources or by the attorneys that we have here today. So if you're interested in that. So we're going to be doing that polling in just a second here. Okay. Helps when I can see my control panel. Sometimes it just goes away. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Maribel Marin, the Executive Director of 211 LA County, and she's going to introduce our other panelists while I figure out this polling thing, and then we'll come back to that before we get started. Okay, so Maribel, I'm unmuting you. I'm asking you to unmute. There you go, and other panelists as well. Okay, Maribel, Executive Director of 211 LA, please take us away.
Thanks, Alana. I want to first say a couple of words about 211 LA. I'm not sure how many of you know that 211 LA is actually a nonprofit organization, and we're really happy today to be able to present to you some legal experts to talk about eviction and your rights, because we've been getting thousands of calls at 211 about this, so we know that there's a lot of concern out there. I think the good news is that yesterday the County Board of Supervisors has extended the eviction moratorium to the end of July. So I think what we're going to hear today is going to be really helpful and important for everyone. So I want to start by just thanking the Community Legal Aid SoCal for reaching out to us and encouraging us to share this information with our callers. And We want to thank especially Alicia Saka, who's with Community Legal Aid SoCal, who's with us today. She is the supervising attorney of the housing program, so she really is somebody who has a lot of background in the kinds of things we're going to be talking about today. We also have Diane Prade from Housing Equality and Advocacy Resource Team. And Diane is the founder and executive director of the Housing Equality and Advocacy Resource Team, H.E.A.R.T LA. That's also a legal nonprofit that helps to ensure that people and their pets remain housed. I think everybody who is quarantined at home, especially folks who are alone, can attest to the value and importance and significance of having a pet with you. It's really a challenging time for us, so that's an important aspect of it, and also needing to be addressed in the issues of tenants' rights. And our last speaker is Lorraine Lopez, who's a supervising staff attorney at Public Counsel. And she currently serves as a staff attorney for Homelessness Prevention Law Project at Public Counsel. And she is with us today along with her colleagues to be able to answer your questions, but also we have, because 211 has had so many thousands of people calling us, we also have put together a list of questions that are coming up very commonly for people. I think the timing of this couldn't be better. I think, a lot of people are struggling or unable to pay their rent due to COVID, whether they've lost their job or because of illness. And there's a lot of concern about what our rights are, especially if we haven't been paying rent during this moratorium period. And we know that the moratoriums, once they're lifted, are going to require some kind of, documentation to demonstrate that an impact was made on a family in order to be protected under the moratorium. So I think the main question, or the first question we want to start off with is maybe asking our panelists to just generally talk to us about tenant protections for people, and then we'll get into the specifics about the moratoriums and the situation under COVID right now. So I just open it up to any three of you, Diane, Lorraine, Alicia, if you want to just give us a general understanding of our rights before we launch into some more specific questions.
Thank you so much, Maribel. And before we do that real quick, it looks like we have the polling ready. If you guys don't mind taking a quick second for that, and then we'll jump on into the conversation. Okay. So you should see shortly a question. Would you like to be added to our email list, which includes resources regarding your rights as a Los Angeles resident? So this is for us to reach back out to you, and we'll be able to get your information from your registration. So that's just letting us know about that. And then the other question is so that we know kind of what the state is of, the people who are participating. Are you currently one or more month behind in paying your rent? So we're going to give another, we have 51% voted that have joined so far. We'll give it a little bit more time for any of you out here that want to make sure that we have your information if you would like us to follow up.
I'll just clarify, there was a question about whether we're talking about LA City or LA County. We are talking about LA County. 211 LA serves the entire county, and we know that there's lots of different moratoriums, but our legal experts today are prepared to answer questions related to the general LA County applicability and also about the city moratoriums.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got 71% voted. Anyone who still wants to put their answers in, go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in the next few seconds here. We've got 81 responses, and most of you do want to be contacted. That's great. And 42% are currently one or more month behind in their rent. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And there everyone can see the results of that. Okay. All right, so we're going to turn it back over to the speakers and I'll be getting your slides on the screen. So go ahead. Okay. Everyone should be able to see the slide with the first question. All right, so Maribel and our wonderful guests, please take it away.
Go ahead, Alicia. I see that you're.
Sure. So right now there are kind of some broad sweeping protections that people have, and then there are some more localized protections. So there are two statewide protections that exist right now. One is an executive order that was issued by Governor Newsom. That executive order we talk about and we let people know about, but the other order that we're going to talk about is a little bit more protective than that one. But to start talking about Newsom's order, what he says is that the order extended the time a tenant had to pay, the order extended the time for a landlord to file an eviction case against a tenant. In other words, if a tenant didn't pay their rent, they couldn't file an eviction case against that tenant right away. It extended it out so that the landlord could not file the eviction case if the reason they were trying to evict the tenant was based on non-payment of rent. So if you weren't able to pay your rent, the executive order said, well, your landlord can't evict you right away. They can only evict you down the line, and it has to be at least 60 days away. That order was actually recently extended again. So right now, landlords can't file against a tenant based on non-payment of rent if that's COVID related. One of the things the executive order also required was that tenants tell their landlords in writing that they're not able to pay their rent due to COVID, and that had to happen within 7 days of the rent being due. So we do still put, even though the other order that we're going to talk about is a little bit more protective, we're still telling tenants, if you can't pay your rent because of COVID, give your landlord something in writing that says you can't pay your rent because of COVID within 7 days of your rent being due, just to make sure you get that extra protection. The other order that came out from a body called the Judicial Council. So what the Judicial Council is a state body that makes rules for the courts. So it makes the rules for the courts themselves. And if you're being evicted, you have to go through a court process. So the Judicial Council was able to make some new rules that affected how the courts handled eviction cases in California. And what they ordered was that your landlord could file an eviction case against you, but then there was kind of a big pause in the case. So normally once a landlord files an eviction against you, the court issues a piece of paper called a summons. That's the next step. What the Judicial Council said is that the courts are not allowed to issue those summons until 90 days after the state of emergency ends. And that applies in all eviction cases. It doesn't matter why your landlord was trying to evict you. The only exception is if there's a health and safety concern. So examples of that would be if your landlord is accusing you of being violent or threatening a neighbor, that could be considered a health and safety concern, and your landlord could apply for an exception to be able to file your case quicker. But what the Judicial Council order essentially did is it put a giant pause on all eviction cases in California, other than these health and safety ones. It said pretty much nothing is going to happen in these cases until 90 days after the state of emergency ends. And right now we're still in a state of emergency and we don't know when that's going to end. So there is some time there. And then the other groups of protections you should know about there are city-specific and county-specific protections in LA. The county protections apply to anybody who's living in an unincorporated area of LA or in a city that has less protective restrictions or no restrictions than the county's order. And then some cities have even more protections on top of the county's order. So depending on where you live, you might have some additional protections.
Alicia, there's a question about what is the difference between a city and an unincorporated area?
So it's just so the difference between a city and an unincorporated area is an unincorporated area doesn't have the city protections. To describe it is, in order to form a city, certain areas came together and voted that they would become a city. And then they get a city council and those sorts of things. So those are what the cities are. The unincorporated areas are the areas that never did that. They didn't, they don't have their own city council, those sorts of things. So everything they do is usually governed by the county.
Thank you. So does anybody, are you done with this question, Alicia? I want to see if anybody else has anything to add generally. Okay, seeing nothing, I'll go on to the next question. So, and we're getting questions in the chat section also about this. And there's lots of different eviction moratoriums in place around the county. Also, you mentioned the state action. And so can you talk a little bit more about those and how to find more information about them? I know that there are a number of trackers out there. And so I think all of you might even have one, but can you talk a little bit about that and how people can navigate the information that might be maybe a little bit in legalese?
Diana, do you want to talk?
Yeah, sorry. And so as we were saying, we're talking about the county right now, but also every city in the city of Los Angeles and also in incorporated cities, so charter cities in the county of Los Angeles, there are specific protections for those particular cities. And so we can't go into all of those different cities today, but we have provided a link to where you can find your particular city, and you'll be able to find the protections there for those cities. So that's why we provided the overall protections that are provided by the Judicial Council notice, but also there are specific protections that may be, broader or, less protective or more protective than what the county provides. And so that is a link there that's going to be able to provide guidance to you be able to find your city.
And just, I know that that link might not be clickable for the attendees, so we will be pasting that link into the Q&A, and then it will be available when we post the website as well, but look for it in the Q&A shortly.
There's also, a lot of situations that are happening now, despite the moratorium. There are landlords that are, knocking on doors and asking residents to pay rent regardless of the moratorium. And there's some folks whose landlord hasn't come, but they're concerned about it and they are wondering how they might be able to speak to their landlord about it. Maybe they've been able to pay rent up until now, but are facing a situation where they can no longer pay rent. So can you guys speak a little bit to how to talk to your landlord if you can't pay your rent, and also maybe some address some of the situations that people are confronting, whether they're being threatened by their landlord, especially to have their belongings removed or to call the police on them, or just threatening to evict them without any process. So can you guys speak a little bit to that? I mean, this is, variations of that are happening throughout the county.
Sure. Can we go to the next slide? So the first question is, should I speak to my landlord? And if so, how? How do I speak to my landlord? So we're advising people that they absolutely should speak to their landlord, because many of the protections require you to notify your landlord in writing that you can't pay your rent due to COVID-19. So in order to ensure you get those protections, including the executive order, it's important that if you're unable to pay your rent due to COVID-19, you let your landlord know in writing. It can be a text message, it can be an email, just something goes to your landlord that says, hey, can't pay my rent, this is how it's COVID-19 related. The writing should state you cannot pay and how it is related to COVID. So, there are a lot of reasons why it could be related to COVID. There are certain things like, you lost your job, and that's pretty obvious that it's related to COVID. But it could be that, you're high risk, and because you're high risk, you can't go to work. And that has decreased your income because of COVID. Or maybe last month you had to buy a whole bunch of stuff to stock up your house so you wouldn't have to go out again because of COVID. And you weren't able to pay your rent because of that. So there are a whole bunch of ways this could be related to your inability to pay could be related to COVID, other than, you lost your job or can't work because of COVID. And the other thing we're advising people is not to agree to any future payment date. So the county ordinance says that people have a year to repay their rent. If a tenant agrees to a future payment date, they could be bound by that payment date. And maybe something goes wrong and you're not able to pay by that date. And that could cause you to lose the protections of the county ordinances. So we're just advising people, if you are unable to pay, it's not a great idea to, agree to a payment date. Just know how long you have to pay the landlord back. And then if we want to go to the next slide. So then some of those things, what is the landlord allowed to do and what is the landlord not allowed to do? Your landlord is not allowed to threaten you. If your landlord is threatening you, you can ask your landlord to communicate via email or text message. In the city of LA itself, they've actually instituted an anti-harassment ordinance where you might be able to sue your landlord if your landlord is taking positive steps to try to threaten or harass you to get you out of your unit. But your landlord is not supposed to be threatening or harassing you. If your landlord also can't force you to pay rent. Your landlord can ask you, are you going to pay me the rent? But they can't force you to do it. If you live in the county of Los Angeles, you have, like I said before, up to 1 year to repay the rent that you owe from the period that was affected by COVID. And that was just extended out, I believe, till July 31st. So your landlord can't force you to pay. You do have a year to repay that rent. Force you to remove your belongings? No, a landlord cannot force you to remove your belongings. The only person who can remove you from your unit, or who is supposed to remove you from the unit, is the sheriff, and the sheriff needs a court order to do that. So in other words, your landlord has to go through the eviction process in order for them to be able to legally lock you out of your unit or remove your belongings. If your landlord attempts to remove your belongings, you should be able to call the sheriff, and the sheriff should stop your landlord from doing that. The other thing we also recommend is documenting the things you have in your unit in case you come home and those things are missing, and you believe it's your landlord. If that were to happen, then it's possible that you could first report to the police for theft. And the other thing you could do is sue your landlord in small claims court for the value of the possessions that you lost. And then the last, often one we get asked is your landlord allowed to call the police or immigration on you? So there's no specific law that says your landlord can't call the police on you. The police are the rules are very broad in that they want to encourage people that if they're having a problem that they don't have to worry about calling the police, that they should be able to call the police. So there are no restrictions that prevent landlords from calling the police. But when the landlord calls the police shouldn't do anything about it. They shouldn't respond to a landlord who's complaining about a tenant who's not paying rent. They should tell the landlord that they have to go through the eviction procedure. The police should not come out and try to forcibly evict you. They aren't allowed to by law. And then oftentimes we also get the question if a landlord can call immigration on you. This one, there is actually a law out there that says a landlord is not allowed to report a tenant's immigration status to immigration or customs. So if your landlord is threatening to call immigration on you, we advise you get some legal help with that, because landlords are not allowed to report that to customs or immigration.
Thank you. And before we go to the next, just wanted to let everyone know that we put the link to the lookup page in the chat. So you have a Q&A box, and then you should also have a chat box. So you can take a look at it there. And then if we have time and people have questions, we can possibly look at that later.
Are there any other responses to that question? Okay. Well, there's a lot of questions that are coming up, but I think we're going to proceed with the questions that we prepared and then also ask some of these great questions that are coming up. There's a lot of questions, so let's see if we can get through as many as possible. So the main concern for people, especially those who have lost their job or other financial hardship due to COVID, what about your stimulus check, right? Because a lot of landlords know that tenants are getting stimulus checks, and there could be some potential harassment around that.
Yes. And so the answer is no. Your landlord is not allowed to demand your stimulus check. The landlord in the County of Los Angeles, they can request partial payment. But if you do not have the rent, you don't need to enter into any repayment plan. And so, we can't stress that enough. Again, you need to be able to put food on your table. You need to be able to take care of yourself. And during these times, while we have these emergency protection measures, then you need to take care of your family. So do not feel threatened or obligated to make a partial payment if you can't make one. The landlord can ask if you can make a partial payment, but you can very much it is in your right to be able to say, no, at this time, I cannot make a partial payment. And also say, no, you don't have to even tell your landlord that you got a stimulus check. That is your private financial information.
And so what about maintenance? When you ask for maintenance services and you haven't paid your rent, what is the obligation there? And it seems from some of the panelists' comments that withholding maintenance is becoming an issue for some folks who aren't able to pay their rent.
Yeah, so the landlord is still under the obligation to maintain the property. And so despite the fact that you are unable to pay rent, that doesn't disqualify the landlord from proper maintenance. I think one of the other issues that comes up with getting repairs or maintenance is the concerns of who is coming in. During this time, we all want to be careful and want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from any type of infection or susceptibility to be able to be with other people and not associate ourselves or put ourselves out there to more harm. And so if there are going to be repairs that be made, you can ask your landlord to, take all the safety precautions that are necessary, to wear masks, to wear booties over their shoes, and to limit the amount of repair and maintenance people that are going to be coming in, and to only repair what it is that the tenant has requested is needed. And so let's say if that is a plumbing issue in the bathroom, then the landlord can't use that opportunity to go in and then be able to inspect all throughout the house. They can come and inspect the plumbing issue. If in fact there's a plumbing issue in the bathroom and they believe that it then comes from the upstairs, then that, it's case by case. I'm just kind of giving all the scenarios that come up when I'm getting these questions.
And there was one question in particular about undocumented tenants who are experiencing this issue of, broken things not getting fixed and, concern about complaining over that. How can they go about addressing this type of situation?
Yeah, so documentation status doesn't stop the fact that the landlord needs to make repairs and keep up with maintenance. That's not an issue. and I know we'll probably answer more questions that were in the chat later, but just real quickly, Civil Code 1940.2 is the code that pertains to if a landlord or management threatens somebody that is undocumented with calling ICE or with calling immigration. And so, and again, we can go over that a little bit later, but I just wanted to be able to throw that out there.
And when people are experiencing problems with maintenance and issues related to, not paying rent and maintenance, is there a place that they can go get more information about how to address that, to, file a complaint or that kind of thing?
Yeah, the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs with the county will be able to address any type of complaint that is had. I do know that they are, that they just enacted the temporary rent control was made permanent. And so it's kind of just be patient, but they can file complaints. And I believe if you go to their website, if you just, push in this Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, they have a web page where you can make complaints.
So it's, one thing if you're not paying your rent on a lease or, that you have for your apartment, but what if your lease is coming up and you haven't been able to pay? Can they not renew your lease?
So, Alicia, did you want to
answer that? So if your lease is terminating, it's going to depend where you are about whether a landlord is under an obligation to renew that lease. But as far as COVID protections go, the Judicial Council order will still apply to you. If your landlord is not under an obligation to renew your lease, if your lease can terminate at the end of it, your landlord will not be able to file an eviction case against you until 90 days after the state of emergency ends. But like I said, whether or not your landlord is under an obligation to renew your lease, that would be, we'd have to figure that out on a case-by-case basis.
So another tricky situation for folks is if you're the subleaser, right? So if their name isn't on the lease and they can't pay the rent, what protections does this person have under the moratorium?
Yeah, so subleaser is a tenant and still has the same protections under the moratorium as a tenant would have. And so what they would need to do is send an email or a letter to the landlord within 7 days of their rent being due to inform them they can't pay the rent due to COVID financial hardship. There is a website that we have there called norent.org that actually, if you plug in different information, your information, it'll automatically email and also mail your landlord a letter. And it's like already a filled out form. So it's very easy, norent.org. It's in multiple different languages as well, but subleasers are also have the same rights of tenants. So they're protected under these emergency protection ordinances.
Thank you. Does anybody else have input on that one? Great. So you have said that, you have a year to pay back the rent. But what kinds of options do I have if I can't pay it back in full, right? Even after a year, are there payment plans? What's really required when they say, that the rent has to be paid in full?
Yeah, I think just real quick, I'm seeing the slides real quick. There was also a question of roommates. So when subleasers come up, then also roommates come up. And same for roommates. So it's kind of like this same thing. If you're a roommate, then again, you are covered by the eviction protection moratorium. Also send a letter to your landlord saying that you're unable to pay rent.
Great. So back to the question about paying back.
Yes, exactly. So the county protections provide up to 12 months after the end of the emergency period ends to pay the back rent. So at this time, the emergency period is still in existence. So and it's in effect until July 31st. That's when the moratorium is in existence, but this is the state of emergency. And so 12 months. So let's say at minimum till the end of July of next year. So what that means is that during this time, if the landlord is demanding rent that's owed during the emergency period, you can state, I don't have that rent. I'm unable to pay that rent, and I'm not obligated to pay that rent until 12 months after the emergency period ends. And so what we, some tips that we have up here that we recommend is, make a 4-month budget. What is your anticipated income? What are the expenses that you're going to have? And then make smart decisions about your needs. Don't overextend yourself, and don't enter into a repayment plan that you aren't going to be able to keep up to. Understand that you don't need to pay back your rent for 12 months, and you can't be evicted for the rent that's owed during this emergency period. And so yes. So in terms of, I guess, in what order to pay back your rent that's owed. So let's say the emergency period, ends July 31st, and August 1st is the first time to pay rent. Whatever money that you have at that point, pay August rent. And so if you haven't paid rent from, let's say, April, May, June, July, those 4 months, you don't need to pay those 4 months for 12 months. So the order to pay the rent is the first month that becomes due after the state of the emergency period ends. And then figure out a plan of how to pay these 4 months that were due within the 12 months after the state of emergency period ends. And it could be, you just kind of budget and figure that out. If you're thinking, wow, well, for 6 months, I can't pay anything. Okay, then for 6 months, you can't pay that back rent. Figure out how you can pay that back rent in the following 6 months.
Just want to add too real quick, the rules are changing all the time. Things are getting updated, more protections are getting passed, some protections are getting rolled back. So it's really important that you stay up to date on what protections apply to you. So great that you watched this webinar today, but after watching this webinar, just make sure you keep checking back in, just so you know if more protections became available or if something changed.
And then just to jump on that, and thank you, Alicia, is also, there's a point here of getting involved. And what that means is that there is still time to be able to advocate to the state and the federal government to have the rent and mortgages canceled. And so there's an opportunity that, despite the fact that rent currently is still owed 12 months after the emergency period, there's still time to advocate, to fight, to get out, to organize, and to ensure that rents aren't canceled. Because at the end of the day, through no fault of the tenants, of your own, you can't pay rent, right? And so this is the time to join your local tenants union, to get involved with their community-based organizations, and to truly advocate for canceling rent.
Thank you. So there's also the issue of getting ill with COVID-19, and a lot of people being concerned of getting evicted simply because they test positive for COVID-19. What kinds of protections are in place for people while they're ill?
So there are a number of protections, and again, it depends on each different city, but most have very clear protections for folks who are actually diagnosed with COVID-19 and are suffering from COVID-19 illnesses, meaning that they can't be evicted just because they are suffering from COVID-19. That's not to say that some landlords won't still try to pressure and serve notices based on that basis. So it's really important to know if outside of LA County, if you're in one of the incorporated cities, whether there are any protections that apply directly to you. But I will say that most of the protections do specifically cover the situation where someone is ill because of COVID-19.
So a related question, because part of the language in the moratorium states that you have to have had impact, right? And how do you demonstrate impact through documentation or whatever it may be, or if you're ill and you need to communicate that, how do you document that? What documentation is acceptable? How do you demonstrate impact?
Well, not a lot of the provisions that are out there actually require documentation. We have been suggesting that folks do store documentation. So for example, let's take the very easy example of someone who's sick from COVID-19. So you're obviously going to keep all of your medical records, your discharge papers, everything indicating that you have been affected by the illness. For the folks who have lost hours, have lost jobs, if they have employers who have given them, furlough notices, notices of termination of employment, layoff notices, those are all very important. Lost income is save all of your pay stubs for during this period. So there are very different ways to document it. And although, like I said, it's not necessarily required by a lot of the laws, if the landlord does challenge whether or not you were actually affected by COVID-19, this is the type of documentation that you're going to need. And we're also recommending that folks keep receipts for childcare expenses, increased grocery bills. Now that a lot of schools have been closed, there's a lot of increased childcare expenses that folks have because they are relegated to homeschooling and having their kids at home all the time when normally they'd be eating meals at school and not having to spend that money. Any sort of medical expenses obviously related to COVID-19. So just anything that shows that you have had a loss of income or have had extraordinary expenses because of the COVID-19 crisis.
Right, and that includes utilities and other expenses that you normally would not be incurring because your children were at school and you were at work. And so just make sure that you're looking at everything related to your expenses.
Correct. And also just to make it clear, although we're talking about all this documentation that you should be keeping, none of these laws are suggesting that someone has to exhaust all of their resources on rent first before taking care of their, the necessities of life. So, because I did see a couple questions pop up in the chat about whether I have to, pay my landlord first and then kind of worry about myself later. That is not what any of these laws are suggesting, but we recommend that you have all this documentation because although the laws don't suggest that, there are a lot of landlords, unfortunately, out there who are not understanding and do expect that you use all of your resources to pay them first. And, who cares about whether or not you eat or your kids eat or whether you have money to pay for your prescriptions. So just, I want folks out there to be aware of that there's nothing in these laws that requires you to use up all your money to pay rent and then leave you with nothing to live.
Related question for people whose leases are up and they owe rent, right? They still have a year to pay that back, and who are they paying it back to? Is their credit going to be impacted as a result of not having paid the rent and having, the payment take a year to restore? So can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And just before we move on to that question, if Alana could just move on to the next slide so that's queued and ready to go. Thank you. For folks whose lease is coming up and is expiring and they are perhaps in a jurisdiction where the landlord is allowed to not renew their lease. Yes, they still have the 12 months to pay that back rent because it is the rent that was accrued during the COVID-19 emergency period. However, if it goes beyond the 12 months that is allowed by the law, what happens is, yes, at that point, the landlord can try to do collections at that point, especially for folks who have moved out, because that is just a monetary debt. So it is possible to be subject to collections if that debt is not paid off or arrangements haven't been made to pay off that debt. That being said, one of the other questions that you had was, what are the options for paying this? And the options are, for most of these laws, it's a payment plan. So we would encourage folks before those 12 months are up who have the means to, to at least try to pay, who are getting back on their feet and know that they have a much more stable financial situation is to get in writing, obviously, an agreement with the landlord as to how many payments they're going to make, what are those monthly installments are going to look like, and specific information on who to pay, because especially if folks are, you know, at the end of their lease and they're moving on to other apartments or other places, that they have the mailing address, phone number, office location for where they should be submitting those payments.
Great. There's also related questions about people who are whose leases are up and they're being renewed as to whether their rent can be increased. And we know there's a rent control directive, but does that apply for leases? And can you just talk a little bit more about the rent control and the protections for that?
Sure. I just want to make sure, Alicia, did you have anything else to add to the last?
It's okay.
Okay. As far as rent control, for example, City of LA and Los Angeles County both have a restriction on when rents can be increased during the COVID-19 crisis. So there are some protections out there that will not allow a landlord to increase the rent for after the emergency period expires. Some are much more generous than others. Some, you know, are 90 days, others are for up to a year. So again, it's really important that it varies depending on the city that you are living in or whether you're in unincorporated Los Angeles County. But there are some protections. And then aside from that, even if there aren't any specific protections related to rent increases, there are statewide laws for folks who are living in cities without rent control ordinances that restrict the amount that rent can be increased. So also landlords will still have to comply with those laws if upon lease renewal they're trying to increase the rent for the new lease.
Great, thank you. And the question that's queued up now is really about community supports and programs that are available. And we're getting a lot of questions about rental assistance. And I can tell you that rental assistance is very limited. In fact, the rental assistance that the county just did was in fact limited to the unincorporated areas. And you know, we had over 20,000 applicants, and you know that there's very little resources in that area. So I think that if you want to just stay on top of what's happening with rental assistance, please check out the 211 LA website. If there are resources for rental assistance, 211 will be notified, and we will definitely have that information available on our website, as well as you can get that by calling us. But let's talk about some of the other resources that are in place, and also maybe places where people can get more information about some of the important things you raised, like some of the protections, the civil code section, you know, guidance on the letter that you can send to your landlord, all that kind of stuff. If you know, we can also get, you know, anything that is in Spanish would also be helpful.
Yeah. So there is a county emergency protection program, and it's coming soon. It's going to be launched in a couple of weeks, and the organizations that are talking today are participating in that, along with community-based organizations. And what that's going to provide is education and outreach. So more of these webinars, more of your Know Your Rights, and then also directly connecting tenants to community-based organizations and legal service providers. Because as you were just saying, Maribel, we can't rental assistance our way out of this situation. There isn't enough rental assistance, and it's more of a small business loan, frankly, for a landlord. And so there just isn't a way to do that. And so what tenants do need to do is educate themselves, know what your rights are. Don't move is one of the biggest things we say. Do not move. You're gonna be able to be connected to a community-based organization, to a legal service provider, so that you understand your rights. If you need limited services, as in writing a letter to your landlord who's harassing you, or just being able to feel you're not alone. And so this program is going to be launching in about 2 weeks or so. And also the agencies that are here today, H.E.A.R.T LA, Public Counsel, Community Legal Aid SoCal. There's many more legal service providers in Los Angeles. More than happy to be able to help you. And then, like I also said before, find your local tenants union. There's the Los Angeles Tenants Union that has chapters all throughout Los Angeles. And there are also community-based organizations that are specific for tenants. And we'll be happy to, you know, if you have provided your information so we can reach out to you, then what we're going to do is connect those zip codes to the community-based organizations that connected. For those of you that answered the first questionnaire at the very beginning of this. And so you'll be able to be connected directly to tenants' rights organizations that are going to be able to protect you. So I just want to stress, don't move, take deep breaths. You're not alone. We are here to provide information. We are here to guide you. And there are many tenants in the county of Los Angeles. So I say there's more of us. There's a lot of us. And so we have a lot of power. So don't forget that.
Great. And for those of you who are asking about the slides and how to contact these organizations, we can make the slides available. I know that the session is being recorded, so you'll be able to also have this information to refer back to and share with others. But we'll also look into sharing the PowerPoint on the 211 website. Of course, you can access all of these agencies' information through the 211 website, but also, you know, we will be in touch with all of you and keep you posted on upcoming sessions, especially one in Spanish. I know that there are a lot of folks out there who would like to hear this session in other languages. I think Spanish will be something that we can easily handle. It might be a little challenging to do other languages, but we'll be working on it. So thank you to the panelists for answering our questions. There are so many questions now from our participants, and so I wanted to try and get some of those questions in front of you. So I'm going to ask Danny, who's been monitoring the Q&A session, if he has some questions that have bubbled up, or I see Alana.
Yeah, Maribel, I thought we'd give Danny just a second to go through those questions, and in the meantime, would it be okay to show that the tool that you guys provided for looking up your eviction moratorium and just explain a little bit how to read it? And then we can show really quick how to find the housing resources that are available on 211's website as well.
And Alana, for people who attended late, got on a little late, there's questions about whether we can resend up the survey so they can sign up.
Yes, we can. I think we can do that again at the end. But if not, you can also private chat us. Just make sure that we don't send your information in the general chat, but you can do a private chat to the host and let us know that way as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop that and pull up the screen that we have for the tool that you guys provided. So I know that people want to be able to look at their location.
And there are some questions also from folks who may be landlords. I do want to say that the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs has a new website up for landlords, especially landlords who have less than 15 units. Lots of information on that website for tenants as well. We can put that link up on our website, share it with all of you. Really good resource there, and the county is really ramping up to help tenants. As you heard today, resources are being made available to help prevent evictions, but there's all kinds of resources that the county is continuing to develop and roll out, and the county website is a good place to check in on those developments.
Okay, just getting the screen share back here. Can you still hear me, Maribel?
Yes.
Okay. My meeting panel has disappeared again. That's fun. Okay, there we go.
So while you're doing that, I think that I keep seeing questions related to people whose leases are up at the end of the month, and they're concerned about whether they're covered by the eviction moratorium, because a lease ending is very different from, you know, you just can't pay your rent in a lease that is continuing.
Yeah, so if a lease is up at the end of the month, when a lease is up, a landlord still has to go through the eviction process in order to get a tenant out of the property. The LA City and the LA County ordinances really don't apply because those apply, you know, in the event of non-payment of rent. What does apply is the Judicial Council order, that order that kind of put a pause on all evictions until 90 days after the state of emergency. If your lease is up at the end of the month, your landlord would have to file that eviction lawsuit against you. But remember, the courts put a pause on those for those 90 days, unless it's a health and safety concern. The end of a lease is not a health and safety concern. So your landlord should not be able to file that eviction action against you until 90 days after the state of emergency ends. And in this case, we're kind of assuming that your landlord is allowed to terminate your lease at that point.
Okay, we have the lookup tool on the screen there.
Yes, so if you were to scroll over, there's a color key up here up top. And so if you scroll on it, it will tell you each, like, you know, if you click on it, it will tell you what the color key represents. And so this one, it says the local ordinance is weaker than the protections. It is identical as these protections, or the green is that it has stronger protections. And then on the side, it has all of the cities in the county, in the city of Los Angeles, and then a link to like a summary of all of those protections. And so you can just go through, find your city, you know, scroll over it, and you will be able to get the summary and see where the protections are. This was just a color-coded guide it was a lot for a lot of advocates to be able to see what protections are stronger and weaker than the county and the city. But for just ease, you can just scroll on the side and pick a city, and then you'll be able to be directed to a summary of what the laws are in that particular city. And then also in that summary, there's going to be a link to the actual ordinance for that particular city. So it's pretty comprehensive and should be easy to use. And if it's purple, then that means that there's no local ordinance, and that would mean that the county ordinance applies. So here, if we see Montebello, where it's, you know, all this purple color, that means that there's no, you know, emergency protection there specific to Montebello. So that means that the county protections would apply for the city of Montebello.
Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And then let's see if I can move to the website. There we go. So if you guys haven't been to 211la.org, I'm just going to show you real quick how to find quickly the housing stuff. You can always do a keyword search right in here, type, you know, housing assistance or that sort of thing. If you're looking for food resources, we have a great quick map-based food finder tool right there as well. I recommend going straight to the COVID-19 page, and we'll have updates right at the top and some basic information. And then we have a few categories right here, including housing services. So you can get to this different ways. But this is one way where we're updating it, and then it links right to our housing search with different categories. So you see right here, housing expense assistance is one of them, as well as landlord tenant assistance, home improvement, other categories. And when you click on that, you'll be able to filter still further and see what is available. So as Maribel mentioned, there's not a lot currently available, but there are some programs available that might have particular conditions. But as things become available, if they become available, we will be adding them here. So please do check it out. And you know, you can use different filters. You can use the map to see the location of things. Please check that out. There's a lot of resources, about 50,000 different resources total that you can find through our website. Okay, so back to you guys for the questions. Danny?
Sure. So we got a lot of great questions. And one of the ones that we got a lot of is, even with the moratorium in place on evictions, what should a tenant do if their landlord continues to give them pay or quit notices?
So it's going to depend on where you live again. Some places are, I'm not familiar if it's in the county ordinances, but some cities have ordinances that even prohibit landlords from serving a notice. So if you're in one of those cities, you should probably send a letter to your landlord citing that prohibition against them even serving a notice. If your landlord isn't in one of those cities, they can serve the notice, but they won't be able to move forward with the case.
Great. Another question that came up quite a bit was around late fees. So in addition to the back owed rent that would be due if a person can't pay due to COVID, can they also accrue these large monthly late fees for the rent that they haven't been able to pay?
So most of the ordinances do, again, prohibit the collection of late fees for any rent that accrues during this emergency period. So a landlord wouldn't be able to tack those on to any of the past due rent. And they shouldn't be and additionally, just in normal times, you can't include late fees on a 3-day notice for non-payment of rent. So that would also just be an additional thing that they wouldn't be able to collect in a 3-day notice regardless. But right now, I know the county and the city do not allow for the accrual of late fees during this time. And a landlord cannot charge those.
Great. I know that there was some guidance at the top of the webinar about the importance of communicating with your landlord within the 7 days of when rent is due. What if a tenant can't submit that letter, but what if a tenant submits a letter after the 7 days?
That's perfectly fine. You know, the county ordinance says specifically that, you know, to do it within the 7 days, but if you are unable to do so in the 7 days, then you're unable to do so in the 7 days. So just give your landlord notice as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it within the 7 days, it's okay. Don't worry. Do it on the 10th day, on the 11th day, as soon as you can.
Great, great, great. You know, another interesting question that came up is, if a tenant tests positive for COVID-19, is there any requirement for them to notify their landlord and or other tenants in the building?
No, there's no affirmative requirement that you notify your landlord or anybody in the building that you've been diagnosed with COVID. So it's private medical information. You do not have to disclose that.
Great.
And sorry, Dana. And I'll also add that there are discrimination protections. There are fair housing protections for tenants that have tested positive for COVID. And so the landlord can't discriminate against that tenant for testing positive of COVID if that landlord were to find out that that tenant is COVID positive. And so just want to flag that as well.
Great, great, thank you. Alicia, earlier in the webinar, you talked about some types of proof of financial impact, or Lorraine, it might have been you, I apologize. Someone mentioned different types of documentation, maybe that it would be a good idea for a tenant to have in place to prove the financial impact. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about what are specific documentation that a tenant should be able to furnish to prove that there's a COVID impact?
So Alicia, feel free to jump in at any point. Obviously for employment reasons, statements from unemployment, pay stubs showing reduced hours, reduced wages, any notice of termination that they've received from their employers as showing that they've lost their jobs or been furloughed or laid off. Those are very specific examples. And we're encouraging the collection of this documentation in the event that a landlord does decide, I don't think you were actually affected by COVID-19. I think you're just trying to take advantage of this situation, and they bring you into court and you have to prove it. Or they do happen to challenge you and you're able to show it, you know, before they try to file an eviction case. And that's more just for the tenant's protection, to ensure that they do have some documentation should they, if unfortunately encounter a landlord who doesn't believe that they cannot pay due to the COVID-19 crisis.
And just some other examples of documentation you can keep is if you had an additional expense because of COVID-19, you can keep the receipt, those sorts of things. Or if you know you don't have childcare, you can get a letter from your normal childcare provider saying, you know, he or she is not providing care right now because of COVID, those sorts of things. And the other important thing to remember, and a lot about why we're suggesting people hold on to documentation that they have, is, you know, these protections are in place, but there's the chance that your landlord could try to challenge you in a trial. And if that were to happen, if your landlord were to show up to, you know, court and try to evict you and say their expenses weren't COVID related, and they were to testify to that, the burden could go back to you to try to prove that your expenses were COVID related, which is why it's important that you have that documentation, because as long as you can prove your side of the case, you should be successful.
And again, it includes utilities and internet, because a lot of folks who may not have had to rely on internet, if you have children especially, or if your work requires it, that means you're incurring additional expenses that you normally wouldn't have had if we weren't under the stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to add that particularly for the county, if you don't have any documentation, you can also self-certify. So that has been something that has been added specifically to the County of Los Angeles. That again, if you don't have any documentation, perhaps that, you know, you are a street vendor and you don't have documentation of being able to show loss of your employment, then you can self-certify. And there is a form on the Department of Consumer Business Affairs website that you can go to that they've provided for self-certification. You can also just literally write, I self-certify that I've had a COVID financial related hardship, and then sign your name. So just know that there is many ways to be able to show that you don't have a COVID related, that you have a COVID related financial hardship. I think that we continue to stress to have documentation if in fact there is a court case. You know, so when you're in court, there's going to be, you can still use your self authentication that you have a COVID related reason, but if you have some type of other documentation, then that obviously helps. But again, if you don't, take a deep breath. It's okay. You can also self-certify that you have a COVID related hardship.
So in addition to being able to, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Danny, just quickly, we've been talking about people with leases, maybe some roommates as well, but does these protections also apply if you're renting a room from someone's house, or you're living in a location that might be an illegal conversion?
So yes, it is, these protections do apply if you are, let's say if you're in an illegally converted garage, if you are in a, these particular emergency protections do protect all tenants during this time. Now the rent control protections for the county of LA are particular, and there's exemptions for single family homes or for those that are renting a room with an owner in a single family home. So those are separate. So just like Alicia said at the very beginning, like these are always changing, but particularly these emergency protections are pretty broad to protect all tenants during this emergency period time.
So it's understood that if the tenant is taken to court, they would have to furnish some proof, a documentation that demonstrates the financial hardship. What if the landlord asks for proof? Is he or she entitled to, meaning does the tenant have to show proof to the landlord before it even goes to court? If say the landlord asks for something like a bank statement or proof of unemployment.
So again, it depends what city and county ordinance that you're under. Some do require it. The county ordinance does not require it. Governor Newsom's executive order does require it. So if you're trying to make sure every single protection, you're covered under everything, even though you don't need everything, you want to make sure that executive order applies to you, then submit the documentation. But if you're in an area that doesn't require documentation, the landlord asks for it, you don't have to provide it.
Okay. Another question that came up was around the tenant's security deposit. So if a tenant decides to move and or can that security deposit be used as partial payment towards back owed rent, and or can the landlord just use that fund as back owed rent?
So that's a really good question. Normally, yes, the landlord can use that to recover any rents that were unpaid at the time that the tenant moved out. They would have to provide an accounting to the tenant as to exactly how much they deducted for any past due rents. However, if a tenant who is trying to work out a payment plan or a payment arrangement with their landlord to pay the rent within the 12 months by using their deposit, that would require a written agreement between the tenant and the landlord, specifically stating that they will be using the deposit to cover X amount of months of past due rents. And I don't know if Diane or Alicia want to jump in for any more specifics.
I don't think any of the ordinances or even the city or county ordinances really even speak to this right now. Yeah. So it's kind of a gray area. I think there are arguments on both sides. I think you could make an argument that technically your rent wasn't due at the time your security deposit came back because you had 12 months to pay it. The landlord could argue it's an outstanding debt. So it's kind of a legal gray area that we don't have a clear-cut yes or no answer to.
Is having an outstanding bill to pay going to impact people's credit or their ability to get other apartments?
So right now there isn't a specific protection in place to protect a tenant's credit due to not being able to pay during the COVID-19 crisis. So all of these protections that we have in place right now, again, it's another one of these areas where folks are working on getting more protections to specifically cover the credit situation. There is going to be a lot of fallout that is being addressed legislatively and by the cities and counties piece by piece as they figure out how this is now going to affect folks post the emergency period. So the simple answer to that is that yes, it could potentially impact credit. A landlord is always able to report unpaid debts to a credit agency as a negative item. So it is a potential negative item that could be reported on the tenant's credit because again, there are no specific provisions out there right now that cover credit specifically.
Diane, just a few moments ago, you talked about self-certification. Can you talk a little bit more? Can you repeat that information and share where self-certification documents can be found if someone wanted to go that route?
Yeah, so let me look that up real quick. Self-certification documents can be found on the Department of Consumer Affairs website. And so let me find that and then I can throw that up in the link in the chat for everyone. And the self-certification just essentially states that you in fact self-certify that you have a COVID-related hardship and don't have documentation to be able to show at this time, but you are able to self-certify that you do have a COVID-related hardship. And that is specific. I want to be clear that that is specific to the County of Los Angeles. And so the city of, and neither the county nor the city require you to provide documentation to your landlord. So I also want to be clear about that. There's no documentation requirement for the city or the county, and particularly here we're talking about the county, for the county. But if there is, a time where you just can't prove a documentation, you can't find documentation, and you were to have your landlord were to try to evict you and there'd be a court trial, under the county protections, you would be able to show that there was this self-certification document that you provided or that you are providing, and that will be able to protect you under the county protections. And then for the county, there's been in the chat that Marina Del Rey isn't in. Oh, great. Thank you, Alana. I was just going to put that in there. That Marina Del Rey isn't on the list, but Marina Del Rey is an unincorporated area of the County of Los Angeles. And so the County of Los Angeles protections would apply to Marina Del Rey. And so with that, sorry, what I was going to say is that there are unincorporated cities that belong to the County of Los Angeles. And so those would be the ones that are protected under the county ordinance, and that would allow for self-certification.
Great. I have one additional question from the chat room, which is, with these broad protection orders related to COVID-19, protecting folks who are experiencing financial hardships, are there additional protections and or supports when people are actually positive for COVID-19? So it's one thing to be protected under this broad, these orders, but if you have COVID-19, are there additional protections in place for you related to housing, rent, etc.?
I'm not aware of any additional protections that would be available to you. I mean, there are the protections that your landlord is not allowed to evict you because you've tested positive for COVID, but I'm not aware of any additional supports beyond these protections, which would apply to you. These protections would apply regardless if you're COVID positive or not.
Okay. So I'm going to do a quick check with Alana, our host. Do we have time for another question or two, or is there some wrap-up stuff that you needed to handle?
Yes, we can take another couple questions. We will be sharing a PDF that has some resources that we've gathered. Those are all also available on our website. And then we will be sending out the recording as well as the resource lists, and we'll add in all of the links that were shared here today as well. So yeah, we can go ahead and close out with a couple of more questions. And I'll put the final just sort of thank you slide up, but we can close out with questions.
Great. I just asked the question about additional protections for folks who have who contract COVID-19, and another question just came through the chat room, which is, are there different protections and or additional protections for families who have children or someone in the family with a disability?
So kind of what I was saying before in terms of fair housing protections. And so people with a disability or children with disabilities have a different set, have an additional set of protections under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And so that is there's an entire body of law that protects people with disabilities. One of those would be able to, if you are a person or you have a child with a disability, one of these protections allows you to make a reasonable accommodation request for various different things. And so again, that would be case specific, but yes, there are additional protections with people with disabilities, and that would be under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And then happy for the other panelists to add to.
Yeah, and just to be clear, those fair housing protections are in place all the time, not just during the COVID-19 crisis. So that is a good question, but generally persons with disabilities are a protected class, and there are always protections for those folks under the fair housing laws that we have here in California.
There was also a question about third parties being involved. So a third party, right, mentioning why is there a third party involved? Should I feel comfortable giving them information and trust them? I'm not, so the question came from Christian Fernandez. I'm not exactly sure who the third party is, but does that question to any of the panelists, can they talk to that? It's a law group that maybe got involved with supporting the tenant or the landlord.
So I guess it depends on whether it's supporting the tenant or the landlord. I'm assuming that this is coming from a landlord, an attorney group that's been contracted by the landlord. There are a lot of landlords who believe they have the power to evaluate whether or not you qualify for payment plans or the 12-month repayment period. And that's just a misconception among landlords. So they contract with attorneys who say, give me all of your documentation so I can see if you're eligible for a payment plan or to take advantage of the 12-month repayment period. There is no such evaluation requirement in any of these laws. So if you do not trust and do not want to provide your information, generally, honestly, we always tell people not to disclose personal financial information, identification information to third parties that you do not trust. And again, there's no requirement under these laws that you do that. The only time that the documentation and information is necessary is if your landlord's taking you to court to say that I don't believe that you're actually affected by COVID-19. So if you do not feel comfortable doing it, don't do it, is kind of the simple answer. There is no requirement in the law that a third party be involved. There's no requirement that the landlord has to evaluate the documentation or any of the reasons that you're stating at this point for not paying rent under these protections. And I also noticed that there is kind of a repeating question kind of related to this as to how many times do I have to tell my landlord that I can't pay the rent? It's every month that the rent is due during this emergency period that you are unable to pay the rent. So to give the example, if you weren't able to pay in June and you provided a notice, and again in July, you're still not going to be able to pay rent, you provide another notice in July until the county or the city lifts their emergency protections. You have to continue providing that notice in writing. And we do recommend to send it either in a written letter, or for those of you that have access to email, you can also use email, but something that can be documented and tracked.
What about text?
Text it can be okay, but that requires you to be screenshotting every time that you send a text to your landlord saying that I can't pay. I would recommend sending a letter. It's much easier to use in court if you have to use it. It's a lot harder to get text and other electronic type of evidence in court. Obviously if you have a lawyer, they'll help you with it. But if you're someone who's going to be going to court by yourself for whatever reason, because there aren't enough lawyers to, help everybody, I would recommend sending a letter or an email instead.
And then to follow up on the letter, if you have the ability to pay the extra cost to send it with a tracking number, that can be really helpful. If your landlord's claiming they haven't received the letter, there'll be a tracking number there that can help. That's the beauty of email. It's free to send something that can be tracked really easily.
And then when you do send it with the tracking number, just make sure that it's with the tracking number and it doesn't require the landlord's signature. Because a lot of times then the landlord, it's like an additional green sheet that requires, or like a little green form that requires the landlord's signature. So don't do the landlord's signature, just the tracking, because the landlord can refuse to sign it and then it will be lost in post office world universe.
I think that's all the time that we have now for questions. And I wanted to thank our panelists for spending their time answering questions from all of you. There are so many questions out there still. I think we're going to go through them and see what additional information we can provide. Definitely this session is going to be recorded and made available to everyone. And as I said, we're also planning a Spanish version of this session sometime in July, and we will make sure to notify all of you the same way we notified you about this opportunity. So with that, I think I just want to again Thank all of you for participating. Thank you for giving us some really great questions to respond to. And, you know, stay in touch with 211 for new information about rental assistance programs that keep cropping up and any other types of resources that are being made available by the county and the nonprofit network that's, you know, very active in Los Angeles. Was there any final notices or comments that you wanted to make in closing?
So we just added the link to just a PDF with different resources. It has contact phone numbers. We always recommend calling, you know, especially now not visiting in person for the resources. But also just remember to please check out 211LA and find resources, 211LA.org, and find resources that way as well.
Again, to our panelists and our participants, thank you very much. And, you know, stay strong. We are all in this together.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We will be sending out the recording and the list of resources and links that we talked about here as well. So thank you so much to all of our panelists and to all of our attendees. Please check back anytime with 211 if you need additional resources. I think that's it. Bye.